She had cleaned the same marble floors for nearly 3 decades, quiet, invisible, forgettable. Wearing her faded janitor's uniform and worn-out sneakers, Clara moved with quiet grace across the lobby of the federal building, mop in hand, head down as always. Then it happened. A four-star general in full-dress uniform approached. His boots echoed with authority. He slowed, then stopped. And in front of security officers, staff, and visitors, he raised his hand in a crisp, formal salute. The room fell silent. Phones froze mid-scroll. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Why would one of the highest-ranking men in the military salute a janitor no one understood? But Clara did. And when the truth came out about who she was and the life she never spoke of, it would leave the entire building in tears. Here's what no one knew. Clara Simmons was the kind of person most people passed by without a second thought. At 68 years old, she had become a fixture inside the federal administrative building where she worked, always present, always quiet, always overlooked. Most employees simply knew her as the janitor, and if they ever referred to her by name, it was usually just Miss Clara said with polite distance and vague familiarity. She was a widow. Her husband had died many years earlier, though few knew the details. She never brought up his name in conversation, never hung photos at her small corner locker. No framed memories, no stories at the break room table. And in a workplace full of ambition, egos, and people chasing titles, Clara was a quiet constant. She never missed a day of work, not once in over 30 years. Originally from a small town in Texas, Clara still spoke with a soft Southern accent, the kind that wrapped her around you like a warm quilt. But she didn't talk much. Her voice, when it did come, was gentle, almost apologetic. She never interrupted, never raised her tone. She simply did her job. Every morning, long before the building came to life with the shuffle of briefcases and the buzz of fluorescent lights, Clara arrived. She'd unlock the side door with her key, always the same keychain she'd carried since the beginning, and walk through the empty marble halls, mop and bucket in hand. But before she began her duties, she had a ritual. In the main lobby stood a simple round table with a narrow vase. It wasn't her job, but every Monday morning, Clara brought fresh flowers, sometimes daisies, sometimes wildflowers, once in a while a single white rose. No one ever asked her to. No one ever thanked her. Most people didn't even notice. But Clara did it faithfully, like a quiet prayer for the day. She'd sweep the entrance polish, the brass door handles, wipe down the public benches, and clean every corner as if preparing the space for someone important. In her mind, she was. Every person who walked through that door mattered, even if they didn't always treat her like she did. Clara moved with quiet grace, her steps soft on the marble floors, her presence barely there. But she noticed everything, the small coffee spill near the elevator, the smudge on the conference room window, the piece of paper left behind on a bench. She picked up what others left behind, not just trash, but sometimes sadness, frustration, and exhaustion too. Some people might have described her life as small, but those who paid attention, really paid attention, would have seen something different. A kind of quiet dignity, an unshakable rhythm, a loyalty that didn't ask for praise. Clara was the kind of person who remembered your name even if you forgot hers. She held the elevator door when your hands were full. She nodded kindly when you looked upset but didn't want to talk. She saw you even when the world didn't see her. Over the years, staff came and went. Directors were replaced, policies changed, whole departments relocated. But Clara remained. The floor changed colors 3 times, the furniture was updated twice, but her gentle presence never wavered. When someone in accounting retired, Clara was the first to sign the card. When a guard had a baby, Clara quietly left a small box of cookies at the security desk. When the government shut down for 2 weeks, Clara still came in. Not because she was required to, but because it gave her a sense of purpose. She told no one. And yet, with all this 30 years of service, daily acts of kindness, absolute dependability, not one person in that building truly knew her story. Not yet. To them, she was just the janitor. But as they would soon learn, Clara Simmons had lived a life of sacrifice, of loyalty, and of love far deeper than anyone could have guessed. Her silence wasn't emptiness, it was reverence. And behind her modest uniform and soft smile was a legacy waiting to be uncovered. Clara Simmons had carried a secret for more than 3 decades, a quiet truth folded deep within her heart, like the old letters she kept in a wooden box beside her bed. While the rest of the world saw her as just a janitor, a woman in a faded work shirt who mopped the marble floors before sunrise, Clara had once worn a different role. She had once been the wife of a soldier. Not just any soldier, Lieutenant Colonel Matthew Simmons, a U.S. Army Special Forces officer who never came home. They met in 1974 at a church picnic in Waco, Texas. Clara was just 21, full of fire and kindness. Matthew was 2 years older, already enlisted, already different from the boys she'd grown up with. He stood straight, spoke softly, and watched her like she was something rare. They married the next summer in a small ceremony held beneath a willow tree near her parents' farm. No grand gestures, just a borrowed veil, a lace dress made by her aunt, and a gold band that never left her finger even now. Their life together was not filled with luxury, but with loyalty. There were long nights and short weekends. Letters and envelopes with overseas stamps. Postcards with "Miss You" scribbled in blocky handwriting. Clara kept every one. She never threw away a single word he wrote. There was one letter in particular that she returned to more than any other. It arrived 2 weeks before Matthew's final mission. In it, he wrote, "Clara, if anything happens to me, don't be angry at the world. Just promise me you'll live close to where I served. I want to know somehow that you're still near." That letter lived folded in her Bible, pressed between Psalm 91 and a photo of them sitting on their front porch. Matthew in fatigues, Clara in a sundress, both barefoot and smiling like nothing in the world could touch them. But the world did touch them. In 1989, Matthew deployed for what was classified as a short-term overseas operation. Clara kissed him goodbye at Fort Bragg the same way she always did, hug tight, forehead press, don't cry till he turns around. That time he didn't look back. 3 weeks later, there was a knock at her door. 2 men in uniform. One held a folder, the other held his hat against his chest. "Mrs. Simmons, we regret to inform you." Clara didn't remember what was said after that. Just the way her legs gave out and how the floor felt too far away. She didn't scream. She didn't faint. She simply folded quiet like she always was. Matthew was declared killed in action. The details of his mission were never released. He was buried with full honors at Arlington, and she was offered all the trappings that come with military widowhood, a folded flag, a medal survivors benefits counseling. She declined almost all of it. What she requested instead startled the Army administrator handling her case. "I'd like to work in the same building where he served," she said. The man blinked. "You mean you want to volunteer?" "No," Clara said softly. "I want to clean it." The paperwork took months, but eventually Clara was assigned a custodial position in the federal building Matthew had reported to before his final deployment. No one questioned her motive. No one knew her name meant anything. Over time, no one even asked. She never spoke of Matthew again. At home, Clara kept the photo of them by the door, not in a frame, just tacked to the inside of a cabinet. She didn't want guests to see, but every morning before grabbing her keys, she'd open the door, touch the photo, and whisper, "I'm still here, Matt." She kept her uniform simple. No pins, no flair, no conversation. The building had changed over the years. Directors came and went, names rotated on the brass plaques, but Clara remained quiet and steady, carrying her promise in silence. Sometimes during her lunch breaks, she'd go to the rooftop and sit where Matthew once liked to eat his lunch. She'd close her eyes and picture his voice, the way he hummed when he cleaned his boots, the smell of his aftershave, the way he always kissed her hand like she was made of porcelain and grace. Clara never remarried. She never dated. She lived in a modest apartment 12 minutes from the building and walked to work most days. She never missed a shift, never took a vacation, and never spoke of the name Lieutenant Colonel Matthew Simmons. To her coworkers, she was simply Clara the janitor who brought fresh flowers to the lobby and made sure every corner gleamed. To Clara, she was keeping a promise. What no one knew was that every sweep of her mop, every polished tile was for him. Every act of quiet service was an act of remembrance. And though the world had forgotten his name, Clara never would. She didn't wear her grief. She worked through it. And in that building where no one recognized her sacrifice, she honored Matthew every single day. The morning had started like any other. The marble floors of the federal building gleamed beneath the soft glow of overhead lights, and Clara Simmons moved quietly through the lobby with her mop and bucket. The faint scent of lemon cleaner trailed behind her as she worked methodically down one column, then another, pausing only to straighten a stack of brochures on a table no one really used. She wore the same faded gray uniform she'd worn for years, her name tag dulled and barely legible. Her sneakers were worn thin at the soles, but they made no noise as she moved. But today was not a normal day. Outside, black SUVs with government plates lined the curb. Flags fluttered at half-mast. Inside, banners hung near the elevators. Honor the fallen, uphold the legacy. A special ceremony was being held in the largest conference hall on the second floor, an event to honor those who had sacrificed their lives in service, particularly those whose names had been forgotten by the public, but not by their brothers in arms. Dozens of military personnel filtered into the building that morning, some in crisp dress uniforms, others in fatigues. A small group of fresh recruits had been invited as observers to witness the weight and honor of a soldier's legacy. Their boots clicked loudly against the marble echoing down the halls Clara had cleaned for decades. She barely looked up. She never did. She had seen ceremonies come and go, retirements, promotions, memorials. She had never attended one, though she had quietly cleaned up after dozens. It wasn't her place to be noticed. She understood that. She accepted it. But this time something different happened. As she crouched to scrub a stubborn scuff mark near the entrance to the main hall, she heard the unmistakable sound of command boots approaching, sharp, deliberate, heavy with authority. Clara didn't flinch. She had heard those footsteps her entire adult life. They reminded her of Matthew. She dipped her rag in the bucket, squeezed it out, and continued working, head down, focus forward. Then the boots stopped. She sensed it before she saw it, like a weight in the air, shifting like a sudden hush before a thunderclap. Slowly, she lifted her gaze. Standing just a few feet away was a tall man in full dress uniform. 4 stars gleamed on each shoulder. His chest bore a line of ribbons and medals that told a lifetime of sacrifice. His eyes, sharp yet softened by time, were fixed on Clara. He blinked once, his jaw tensed. Then his entire posture shifted, not out of confusion or surprise, but something deeper. Recognition. Clara, he said, barely above a whisper. Clara stood slowly, her knees creaking with age, her back straightening from years of muscle memory. She looked him in the eye. "Hello, General Harris," she replied, voice steady, soft. The entire lobby seemed to freeze. Security guards, staffers, young recruits, even civilians near the cafe, everyone turned toward the strange silence. Then in front of all of them, General Thomas Harris, commander of the Joint Armed Forces Command, and one of the most respected men in uniform, stepped forward and saluted. It wasn't a casual nod. It wasn't ceremonial. It was personal, sharp, deliberate, full of reverence. The recruits, seeing their commander's gesture, instinctively stiffened. Whispers swept through the crowd. Who is she? Did she serve? Why is the general saluting a janitor? Clara didn't speak. Her eyes shimmered, not with pride, not with ego, but with memory. Painful, beautiful, sacred memory. General Harris lowered his hand slowly. Then, as if addressing a room full of soldiers, he said clearly, "This woman is the wife of Lieutenant Colonel Matthew Simmons. He died in my arms 35 years ago, and she has honored his legacy more faithfully than anyone I've ever met." You could hear the air being pulled out of the room. No one moved. No one blinked. He asked me, in his last breath, to watch over her, but I never had to, because she's stronger than any of us ever knew. Behind Harris, several officers now stood at attention. A few of the recruits had lowered their heads. One of the junior staffers wiped at his eyes with the back of his sleeve. Clara, ever humble, looked down at her mop, then back up. "I was just doing what he asked," she said quietly, staying close. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was reverent. For the first time in 30 years, Clara wasn't invisible. She wasn't forgotten. She wasn't just the janitor. She was a widow, a keeper of memory, a woman who had endured more than most could imagine and never asked for a thing in return. The ceremony upstairs had not yet begun, but down here in the lobby, Clara had cleaned for decades. The true tribute had already taken place. And it started with a single unexpected salute. The silence in the lobby hung thick like a pause in time that no one dared to break. Staffers with coffee cups frozen mid-sip. Young recruits too stunned to speak. Security guards standing motionless. Even the receptionist who had been typing just moments before had her hands still on the keyboard or eyes wide. A 4-star general had just saluted. A janitor. No one could make sense of it, until General Harris stepped closer and turned slightly, addressing the crowd that had begun to form in a slow, respectful half-circle around them. "She's not just a janitor," he said softly, yet with the authority of someone who had led men through fire. "This woman, Clara Simmons, is the widow of Lieutenant Colonel Matthew Simmons, one of the finest officers I ever had the honor of serving beside." A murmur moved through the room as though the very walls were waking up to her story. She has walked these halls for over 30 years, Harris continued, not because she had to, but because she made a promise. He glanced toward Clara, whose hands were now gently folded in front of her. Her mop stood to the side, forgotten for the moment. Her head was bowed, not out of shame, but in reverence. Harris cleared his throat, his voice catching slightly. 35 years ago, in a dusty compound overseas, Matthew and I were in the same unit. We'd served together for over a decade. He was a man of conviction of principle and deep love for his country and his wife. We were ambushed. He was wounded, badly. We tried to extract him, but he paused, pressing his lips together to keep control. As I knelt beside him, he grabbed my arm. His last words weren't about medals, not about fear, not even about the mission. He looked me in the eyes and said, "Tom, if I don't make it back, watch over Clara. Make sure she's not alone." The room was utterly still. The only sound was the soft hum of the building's ventilation system. "I failed him," Harris said quietly. "I got pulled into command. I got caught up in the world. And while I was shaking hands and giving speeches, she was here every single day, keeping the promise he made and living out a loyalty most of us only speak about." Clara looked up, now her eyes wet with tears that glistened but didn't fall. She wasn't ashamed to cry. She wasn't overwhelmed by the attention. She was remembering, feeling, and honoring. "I didn't do anything special," she said in a voice barely above a whisper. "I just stayed close." That was when the first person stood up. One of the junior officers, still holding his cap against his chest, rose to his feet without a word. Then another. Then the security guard at the desk, the receptionist, the young recruits. Within seconds, the entire lobby was standing in silence, a spontaneous gesture of respect more profound than any pre-planned ceremony. No one told them to rise. They just did, because sometimes the truth doesn't need a microphone, it only needs to be revealed. And in that moment, Clara Simmons was no longer the woman who cleaned the floor. She was a symbol of sacrifice, of quiet courage, of love that doesn't fade with time. General Harris stepped back and gave a slight nod, as if to say, "Now they know." Clara wiped a tear from the corner of her eye, took a slow breath, and whispered, "Thank you." But truthfully, it was everyone else who owed her thanks. Because without ever asking for recognition, without ever raising her voice, Clara had reminded them all what service, loyalty, and love really looked like. And now the whole building would never see her the same way again. The following week, Clara Simmons sat in the front row of the largest hall in the federal building, one she had quietly cleaned for 30 years without ever being invited to sit inside. But this time the chairs were arranged for her. The flag stood at full height. The stage was lit. The podium bore her name. A formal ceremony had been organized by the Department of Veterans Affairs and Military Leadership. It wasn't just a tribute to Lieutenant Colonel Matthew Simmons, it was for Clara too. Someone had finally understood that her sacrifice didn't end the day he died. She had kept his memory alive with every quiet step through those marble halls, every unnoticed act of dignity and grace. On the day of the event, she wore a simple blue dress, the same one she wore to church. Her gray hair was tied neatly in a bun, and she carried nothing but a folded handkerchief in one hand. Clara didn't want attention, but attention had found her. The general returned not in command, but in gratitude. He was the first to speak. Clara Simmons reminds us all that heroism doesn't always come in the form of battlefield medals or loud declarations, he said. Sometimes it's a woman with a mop in her hand, a promise in her heart, and a lifetime of loyalty etched into every quiet step. When her name was called, Clara walked slowly to the stage where a folded American flag, the very one given to her over 30 years ago, but which she had quietly returned to the Army, was now handed back to her, along with Matthew's service medals preserved in a polished wooden frame. The crowd stood again, just as they had the day she was first recognized in the lobby, but this time it was formal, public, recorded. Someone from the press took a photo, Clara standing still, flag pressed against her chest, head bowed slightly, not in grief but in a quiet kind of strength. That photo spread across social media within hours. The janitor who was a hero's widow, a salute to loyalty. Clara Simmons' story, True Love, 30 years later, veterans groups shared it. News anchors recited her story on the evening broadcast. Even young people, most of whom had never noticed the janitor in their own schools or public buildings, started writing tributes online. Her mailbox overflowed with letters from strangers, fellow widows, soldiers' children, high school students. But Clara remained who she had always been. The next morning, she still came in early, still brought a fresh vase of wildflowers for the front desk, still wiped down the brass handles with quiet precision. When one of the building managers asked her if she needed time off or wanted to reduce her hours, she smiled kindly and said, "No, thank you. There's still work to be done." What did change, however, was the building itself. A large conference room on the third floor, once called Room 3A, was officially renamed the Simmons Room, dedicated to both Clara and Matthew. The plaque at the entrance reads, "In honor of Lieutenant Colonel Matthew Simmons and Clara Simmons, a soldier and a keeper of his legacy. May we never overlook the quiet ones who carry our nation's memory." That room is now where senior meetings are held, where new employees are onboarded, where military dignitaries gather when visiting the building. And every time someone enters, they pass by the photo of Clara standing in her work uniform, holding the folded flag just beneath it, a quote carved in brass. "I didn't do anything special. I just stayed close." People began greeting Clara with more than a nod. Some stopped to shake her hand. Others asked for her story. A few even brought her coffee or left thank you notes near her supply cart. But Clara never let the recognition change her. To every person who praised her, she gave the same gentle reply, "I didn't do anything big. I just cleaned the floor." Because for Clara, it was never about the medals, the applause, or even the room named after her. It was about love. It was about keeping a promise. And in the process, she taught an entire community that quiet faithfulness is as noble as any uniform. Her life hadn't just changed that day, it had finally been seen. And for Clara, that was enough. How many people around us live their lives in quiet sacrifice, unseen, unrecognized, yet deeply faithful to something greater than themselves? Clara Simmons never asked for attention. She never expected a salute, a headline, or a plaque on a wall. What she offered was something our world often overlooks: steadfast loyalty without applause. She didn't wear a uniform, she didn't stand behind a podium, and she didn't speak of her story. But every day for over 30 years, she honored a promise that no one else could see. Not every hero fights on the battlefield. Not every act of courage is loud. Some of the strongest people we'll ever meet are the ones who carry their burdens, silently cleaning our buildings, walking our streets, serving meals, or holding families together after loss. Clara's story is a reminder that duty doesn't end with ceremony, and that love, real love, doesn't fade with time. It shows us that the most extraordinary lives can be hidden behind the most ordinary routines. And perhaps the most important question her story leaves us with is this: who have we walked past today without noticing? Was it the quiet man pushing carts in the parking lot? The woman cleaning the hospital hallway before sunrise? The neighbor who always waves but never says much? Could they be like Clara? Someone carrying memories, pain, or even great acts of devotion beneath a simple uniform? We live in a world that often rewards noise, speed, and recognition. But Clara's life whispers a different truth: that character is built in silence, that honor can be lived, not just earned, and that love doesn't need a spotlight to endure. So the next time we pass someone in the background, let's pause. Let's look again. Not because everyone needs a medal, but because everyone deserves to be seen. There may be a Clara near you right now, working quietly, giving generously, loving deeply. Let's make sure we never overlook them again.